great pleasure to welcome you to War Follows Everyone Home, a special collaboration between the University of Chicago and the Lyric Opera of Chicago. For several months, the University and Lyric have been working together to fulfill a yearning of director Peter Sellars, to unite the work of Sophocles and Handel with the lives of modern-day war veterans. That journey has led us to unexpected places, in some cases inspiring veterans to tell stories they have long held private, in others transforming enduring views about veterans or their families that could no longer stand up to the evidence. In turn, those experiences have impacted the art, making Peter a sort of war correspondent, carrying knowledge of the veteran experience back to the Opera House as the production of Hercules was taking shape. Throughout Chicago in recent weeks, Peter has been meeting with groups of veterans brought together by the university, working with the extraordinary people of the McCormick Foundation and A Safe Haven. Those conversations have enriched us all, and in the case of University of Chicago veterans, joined people who had never met before, from professor to graduate student to maintenance worker, around their shared experience of war. Today, we have brought all of those veterans together, first to see the opera Hercules in rehearsal, and tonight to talk. And I think I speak for everyone here when I say it was quite an afternoon at the Civic Opera House. Helping to shape that conversation today is an extraordinary group of panelists. There are detailed bios in your programs, but allow me to introduce them. John Cacioppo is a colleague from the University of Chicago who is a pioneering research in the area of social neuroscience and whose inquiries into social isolation are changing the way we think about the individual and society. His recent research on loneliness is having significant impact on our most basic understanding of genetics, behavior, and health. Jack Fuller is a university trustee and Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, as well as a veteran of the Vietnam War, where he served as a soldier and a correspondent for Stars and Stripes. Jack is also the father of an Iraq war veteran. Among his 9 books is Fragments, his novel about the Vietnam experience. Michael Sullivan is the Illinois State Director of the Student Veterans of America and a U.S. Marine Corps veteran who served in Kosovo, Horn of Africa, Iraq, and Haiti. Michael was among those Chicago area veterans who met with Peter in recent weeks to discuss his time at war. Finally, our moderator is Julia Keller, the Pulitzer-winning cultural critic for the Chicago Tribune and a visiting faculty member at the University of Chicago. Her recent novel for young adults, titled Back Home, is Julia's haunting exploration of what happens to a family when a father returns from Iraq with a traumatic brain injury. Lyric Opera's production of Hercules was sponsored by Julie and Roger Baskus, Stephen Edlis and Gail Neeson, Richard and Susan Kiphart, Sidley Austin, American Express, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Our panel discussion tonight is supported by the University of Chicago's Office of Civic Engagement, and for Lyric Opera by Sylvia Neal and Dan Fischel. Lastly, let me say what a true pleasure it has been to unite these 2 great city institutions, the University and Lyric, both of whose names end, not insignificantly, in of Chicago. Working together to use art and research to create the space for Chicago area veterans to meet and explore has been a powerful experience, and I hope give a new voice to a significant and important population in our city. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our panel and turning it over to Julia.
Thank you. Welcome to you all. Just to tell you a bit about the logistics about how we're going to be doing this. The panel will be mixing it up here for about 20 minutes or so. And then, just when you can't stand it anymore, we'll be turning it over to the floor and letting you all offer your comments or ask your questions to panel members or to fellow audience members. And we'd ask you to please go to the microphone that's nearest you. As you know, this is being broadcast in all kinds of forums all around the world, I think. And we want to make sure that everybody gets heard. So there'll be a sort of a rambling mic over there. It sounds like a folk song, doesn't it? The rambling mic. That you'll be able to, so just raise your hand when you have a question, and we'll be going to questions very shortly here. So as I said, hang on to them, and then you'll get your say. And we want everyone to get their say. That's one of Peter's great goals, I think, is having everyone have their say. You know, the way I'm going to start off here is going to be terribly unfair, which is I'm going to ask everybody here real quickly to say what they thought, and here's why I think it's unfair. The wife of Edward Hopper, the great portrait painter, once said that when you were talking to him, it was like throwing a stone into a well and waiting to hear the splash, and you never did. Now, the difference is with a work of art, you throw the stone in the well and you listen and you listen, and it takes a while to hear that splash. You do hear it, but it takes a while. So we were talking just before the panel began that, in a way, I think that what art really does is to keep moving within us, and these great concentric rings are working outward. So our first reaction may not be our reaction tomorrow or the next day or at the end of our lives. So what we're going to be doing here today is just that first rough sketch. Unfair as it might be, I'm putting everybody on the spot, and I'm going to start with my friend here on the podium, Mike, who's going to talk a little bit about, and I'm just going to ask him the most basic question of all at the end of any work of art. What'd you think?
To be honest, I thought that Peter hit it out of the park. It was a grand slam. It was beyond impressive. I felt that the enemy prisoner of war, the POW, as you may, was really representative of not a person, but the burden and the stress and the PTSD and all those things, the stuff that veterans bring back with them from combat, and how that came home with him and interacted in a negative way and kind of drove between him and his wife and him and his son, and how at the end of the play they reconciled and embraced that stuff because they realized that the sacrifices that he made that came with all those burdens were for the liberty and the concept of the United States, or of the concept of his country, what he was fighting for, why he was in combat to begin with.
Did the fact that it was an opera throw you at all? I mean, have you been to operas before? Is that a form you're familiar with?
This was my first opera.
Ah, okay.
I would like to see many more if this
is really?
How they
Okay. Yeah.
Wonderful. Absolutely.
But you know, when you're test driving cars, Mike, you never want to start with the BMW and then work down to the Subaru. So just warning you. How about you, Jack? Did you tell us what you thought?
Well, I was profoundly moved by the music, which, because of the Baroque style it was in, was just often an beautiful, excruciating cry of pain, and it just seemed so wonderfully expressive and right. Hard to imagine the experience without that extraordinary music.
It's funny, when you said that, I hadn't thought of it till now, but we talk about things being operatic experiences, or maybe someone who's a little over the top in their emotion, where they're very operatic and all that. But just as you're saying that, it's occurring to me that, in a way, the music and the subject matter are ideally matched.
Right. Didn't seem exaggerated to me.
Not at all, exactly, in some ways that maybe other kinds of emotions, when transmuted into opera, might seem. John?
What struck me most was the positioning and movement of the people, the actors across the stage. Homecoming's about reconnecting. The troops can't wait to get home and reconnect. Those who are at home waiting can't wait to reconnect, but they're not static objects. They're moving across time, and they've changed as a function of what they're exposed to. And you saw in this play, this opera, that when they came back, they were moving toward one another but not connecting. And I thought at one point you had Hercules turn his back to the audience. And he kept his back to the audience for a while, and then he moved into the shadows. And it really, I thought, captured well the attempt to reconnect, the desire to reconnect, but the failure to do so effectively. And across the course of the opera, toward the end, finally empathy was expressed and there was connection. It took tragedy to get to that point, but as you pointed out to me earlier, operas are in part about running out those counterfactuals so you can see what to do differently so that the tragedy doesn't occur.
What a great point, the idea that, as you say, both sides are moving. Both the person who's returning and the family, they haven't stayed static. You've got two relationships that are moving simultaneously, and just the kind of complications that would create, because we want people to stay static when we're not with them. That's one of the things we want them to be exactly the way we remember them, and that's not the case. I mean, I assume that you all will help verify for us. So, all right, Peter, totally unfair. You're sitting there. This is something you've created.
I had the ideal audience. It's one of the most incredible days of my life to have you in this audience today during this performance, and I just have to thank so many people here for everything they contributed, and just to say I'm still working, and this is going to be a lot of years ahead, and I want to keep the conversation moving between all of us because there's a lot to say. And there's a lot to do in this country right now. And I think this piece begins to open some things up. And we tried, for me, the hardest part was being delicate enough with things that we didn't overstate them and didn't make something into a stereotype. And at the same time, we couldn't ignore certain things. So it's always trying to find the right balance, for how that works. But as Jack said, the pain is so real, and that's what that music really does. And as John said, the way people can move in space, and you feel this strange space, which, as you saw, is both a ruin that goes back, centuries, and is also maybe some place in Utah where they're having a barbecue, or who knows what that space is. But they're all in this strange space of the mind. And I think a lot of it does give you that mental and emotional space, which is what we wanted people to live in. And the other thing for me is this is a topic that's so often discussed as ugly. And one of the things I love having art do is you have beautiful voices. As you say, also there's beauty, and these people are not monsters, they're not walking wounded, they're also really beautiful. And so one of the great things about having opera is you have right in the crisis and right in the tragedy, there is so much human beauty and so much spiritual release going on from those voices.
It strikes me that war is one of these things that it is across so many media. There are movies about it, we have video games, we have the memories we hear from usually friends and relatives. It's really just across it's the original multimedia thing, war is. And I wondered if there's a kind of a difficulty in then transmuting that into art, because it is at once so familiar and so unfamiliar for most of us. Obviously familiar for veterans, but I mean for the public at large. It occupies a really peculiar space in our cultural imagination, because we all think we know it. We've all seen, the Vietnam War era movies, The Deer Hunter and Coming Home. We've all seen, I assume you've seen a lot of the very, very good Iraq and Afghanistan movies coming out. Stop Loss was one, I think was, and some are about the home front and some are about the battlefield itself. So I can't really think of another human experience that goes across so many media with so many divergent aims and done by so many different kinds of people with so many different things involved in it. Any thoughts on that from these people that know a lot more about it than I do? Mike and Jack, certainly.
Well, I can talk about it a little bit because I confronted that problem as you did in your book. I confronted it when I wrote Fragments, and I'd have to say that I wrote it because everyone around me when I came home And I came home and went back to school. It was a very welcoming thing to do at the Vietnam period, is to go back to a university. And everyone around me knew everything about my experience, particularly the moral dimension of it. And it was so thoroughly off. I mean, it wasn't just that, I'm not talking about in some political sense, it just didn't have a clue as to what the real moral, where the point of the moral knife was up against you. They just didn't have any idea. They thought it was, I don't know what they thought. And it got to be almost physically impossible for me to tolerate this. Mm-hmm. And the only way I could deal with that, because I write,
is to write.
Try to write and try to make it. And I felt, as I'm sure everybody does when they're in this kind of circumstance, I was fighting against an assumed knowledge that
everybody thinks they know.
Yeah,
is
exactly your point. And it's not that the experience is unknowable or uncommunicable, or incommunicable. It's just that it's so easy to be immersed in a lot of false impressions of it or false images of it. And so anyway, yes, I think it's a very big problem, but it's the reason art exists. It's the reason why people do this and why it's absolutely essential for people to do it.
How about you, Mike? Did everybody kind of tell you what it was like for you before you got a chance to talk, or were you?
No. I think the big change, and it's a positive in America, in society. The difference between myself and Mr. Fuller is, when people came home from the Vietnam War, when veterans came back from the Vietnam War, they were themselves treated very poorly. I think it was one of the darkest chapters in America's history. And as we've transgressed into this new OIF period, as it's called, meaning the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, I think we can agree that there still is an unpopularity to the war in the United States. There's people that don't think we should be there. There's veterans that don't think we should be there. But what has changed for the better in society is the fact that people are learning to distinguish between the politicians that make those decisions and the veterans who have no control over where they go or what they do. They're just trying to serve their country.
Right. Yes. How does that? How does this come up, or how does it work in your research, John? Is this in terms of what you deal with and what human beings require?
One of the things that happens is if you set up expectations, if you walk in talking about post-traumatic stress disorder and the soldiers come in and they're being trained and that keeps getting repeated, if that's what you expect, that's what you'll realize. There's also post-traumatic growth. I think you pointed out that the term disorder was added. It's no doubt it's post-traumatic stress. But as many of you sitting in the audience know, there's also some growth through that process. It's painful, but there's both opportunities. And it's really, what do we make of it? And one of the things that drew me to this panel was Peter and what he was trying to achieve by this opera, and that is to make a community forum to help more convert that stress experience to growth by talking as a community in a safe environment, reinstantiating kind of the notion of contingency and benevolence, something that's ripped away from individuals during war, and trying to move beyond the stressors to make it something that turns out to be a base from which they can learn.
Make something of it. When you were saying that, I was reminded of, there's a great line in the Lorraine Hansberry play, The Sign in Sidney Brewstein's Window, when there's a terrible event that occurs, and a woman is crying, is sobbing, and her friend says to her, yes, cry now, and tomorrow we'll make something strong of this sorrow. I've always loved that line, and I never quite understood why it spoke to me so, but I think it's what you're saying. It's not that events don't occur, they do. There is reality, the world is what it is, and war is what it is, but it's what you make of it that, I guess, makes that difference and that connection that you mentioned. Peter, how fearful were you, or actually intimidated were you, although I can't think of the word intimidated and Peter Sellars even in the same Same. It just doesn't work. So forgive me. I'm trying to lie to two things that don't work. By this particular subject, this one that is so, it's life and death, and it's more than life and death as well. It's families and people and pain and so close to the American experience, political, controversial, everything. When you went into this, were you thinking like, oh my God?
Oddly, for me, what motivates my work usually is a really simple thing. What is missing from this picture? If it's missing, we need to put it there. And what was missing from the picture of America was the voices of veterans. And I really would like this country more if I heard more of those voices. People who really do have earned the right to speak and have a basis from which to speak. And so for me, I needed veterans to be more present in my picture of America, and not in hiding or not being hidden or not being moved off stage, but quite the opposite.
Or stereotyped.
Or
too,
stereotyped,
yeah.
or given a blanket reading, but the opposite. And for me, these wars are the biggest things going on in our country, and we don't know how to talk about them, and there's not a conversation with the people who are fighting them, and the people who are funding them, and so that's a very real, for me, missing link, just being an American every day, and so I wanted just to have a place where we could talk and where those things didn't have to be tucked away as people or as issues. And the other thing, as John was saying, we just, the atmosphere in the country is so harsh a lot of the time. And I did want as a place that was actually benevolent, where there was some real feeling that could flow, and not just a really harsh atmosphere.
And we don't talk about it. I don't know about you all, but it's extraordinary to me that you can go through like an entire presidential press conference and it doesn't come up. We're fighting two wars and it doesn't come up. That's why it's not on the front page. It hasn't been on the front page of the newspaper since when? I mean, not for a long, long time.
May I add
Yes,
something?
sure.
Just to give you an idea of the magnitude of the problem, there's 1.7 million soldiers who've served since 2001. There's also 1.2 million spouses and 900,000 children. And so one of the things that Peter in this play did was to point out it's not just the veterans, but it's those 1.2 million spouses and the 900,000 children. And I can tell you the data show they're affected adversely as well, just as the play depicted.
War follows everyone home. I mean, the amazing title of this, I think. Well, I'm sure you all have some things you want to add and join in the conversation here. So go to a mic. We'd love to hear from you, hear your thoughts.
Where are those mics?
There's the rambling microphone.
Come there, right there.
Sure.
My name is Paul, and I served at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico in 1965, and this was my last year in service. And they asked for volunteers, and I volunteered. I always did. I think I left Cannon in May, at late April, early May, and I didn't arrive in Vietnam till late July, early June. But when I got there, I had a kind of secret mission I was on. But when I arrived there, they assigned me to put bodies in body bags and load them on trucks before breakfast. That was a kind of traumatic experience for me. And I don't want to take up too much time, so when I returned home, I was rather proud of the duty I'd served. I was wearing the best blues, and they spit on me.
I'd like to thank you. The one. I was U.S. Army, 1958 to 64. My son, I'm here with the invitation of my son who was Navy, and I have a grandson that was Navy. When I went in, my dad took me to the train and he said goodbye, and that was it. But the part about it that I really liked was the party. And I really related to the party because pain is a short memory, but I do remember some of the spontaneous parties, those beer parties. And they wheeled out the cooker there, I thought of when my grandson was on a ship being commissioned at Pearl Harbor. I went on a Tiger cruise with him. The Chung Hoon was commissioned there, and and they wheeled out on the back deck with the helicopter deck about 4 cookers, and it was a hell of a party. And I thought, well, this is good. This is good. So I'm glad you included that, the party scene, because the party is, I think, part of the keep you sane. Thanks.
Got right down here. Got a microphone there?
Is this one?
Is it working?
I suppose. Let's see. Does it have it on off?
There
it
you go.
does. My name is Travis. I'm a Vietnam veteran. Hi, Peter. Yes, I've told Peter what I didn't like about the opera already, and there were these 2 parts that really bothered me. But for here, my concern is that we're talking about what we don't talk about in terms of war. Well, for me, as a black male, we're not talking about the fact that Hercules has returned and he's black. We're not talking about it. This isn't about that, yes, but at some point, there's a whole other conversation, and I want to be there when you have it, please. Okay? Especially when he's got a young white female and an older white female wife and the significant other, presumably. I want to be there when that conversation happens because I think we're avoiding it here, but I can't avoid it on the south side of Chicago. Thank you.
What kind of conversation do you want that to be? I mean, what do you? Yeah, I didn't really think of avoiding it. So tell us. What
Well,
you're thinking.
there are when you first meet the captive. She's got this beautiful voice, and you know there's trouble. You know there's this rising conflict of the 5 types of conflict. Rising conflict is one you want, and it's working beautifully. And there's this exquisite voice masked. You know there's trouble. Well, then the wife is there. Later comes Hercules, and then there is this dissonance. This is a dissonance we know very well on the South Side that maybe we don't treat the same way in the white community, but we treat it very strongly in the black community because of the numbers of black males available to black females. I have 3 sisters. This is a very dynamic statement to them and about black women, for instance, on the South Side, who often will lose their black males to another woman who has money or has the looks or who doesn't have a child or the like in our community. So that's a conversation that has, I think, at some point to happen. But I won't digress right now.
Sir? Yeah, just take that mic.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Edward. I'm U.S. Navy Fighter Squadron, VF 191, USS Sullivan. My military life, I really don't have any complaints about because even in this disorder, it was perfect. What we have here is an unperfect reentry. And it solved all the problems if we could make each male fearless, upright, and independent. It'll solve the rest of the problems automatically. But when you have veterans who fought for the country who come home and then they have to refight again for housing, something wrong with that picture. And while we're doing all these grandiose things like what we're doing here, if you look around you, we are losing America to non-Americans. And that's a slap in the veteran's face. That's a travesty of justice all by itself. So what we need to do is collect ourselves and have the same camaraderie we had in the military and regain our country and put our males back to work. And that would strengthen the families. That would give the shorties something to look up to. I mean, how far up do you have to look at me and I'm homeless? You know, what am I going to show him? The first thing he would think in his mind is, I don't want to be like that. You know, so when a man chooses from two options, the only two options he have, and both of them are bad, how can you blame him? You only left him two options.
The thing you said initially when you were saying it wasn't your military experience, it was that reentry. I mean,
It's
that's
the reentry.
really what we get at in this opera, don't you think? That's
exactly.
That's it. It's there's a military experience and then there's the return, and it's this return that we don't focus on, we don't want to talk about. Not the military experience, because that's where all the movies are and all the.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of sensationalism with
Yes,
that.
yes,
you
that's
know.
the word.
And it's very simple. I would suggest that if anybody in this room or within the sound of my voice have any property, rent some of that property to a veteran. It's not like we need money. Let's get that straight. And I'll probably be hated for saying this, but they can keep the money. Just make things properly available to me, and I'll do the manly thing about it.
I wanted, Peter, you know what I'm going to talk about, but
Go.
with this distinguished panel, I've just got to mention two Pulitzer Prize winners. Now, and I may have my facts wrong. The opera was written in 1744. We're dealing with the same problems today they dealt with then. We're fighting two wars with a volunteer military. That's an experiment. No nation has ever fought one war, let alone two with a volunteer military. If we don't do better at taking care of our veterans, in my opinion, and that's what we're working at least at our foundation, is to try to do better, what will happen? Will young men and women continue to volunteer? And if they don't, pray tell, where's our national security going to happen? And I was wondering, with this esteemed panel, if you could comment on that, especially Mr. Fuller. I mean, with your experience, if you could comment on that.
Well, that's a big bill to fill. So I'll just try to be real straight with you. When people volunteer, they're not thinking about what's going to happen to them, I think. I mean, I'll speak to my own son. I remember having a conversation with him. He had read my novel. I said, "Did you learn nothing? You're going to volunteer?" He said, "Well, you went." "Yeah, well, they drafted me." People aren't thinking exactly necessarily about what their long-term future is when they volunteer. They're young. They're very young. I was an old guy at 22. Most people are quite a bit younger. And so I'm not, I think that we need to figure out how to bring people back properly, regardless of whether it affects a recruitment on the front end. It's just an imperative. You can't do this to people. You can't change them in the first instance, is what happens when you go through training. You can't take them and in effect change the psychological dimension of their lives so that they're able to do what they have to do in combat at war. And then set them off into a situation that is often horrendous, incredibly intense. Bring them home and say, "Well, there you have it. Now guys, figure it out," or gals these days, figure it out. That's just an appalling bit of behavior. And so to me, it's not so much about whether it's, even if the recruitment levels went soaring, I'd still say we still have a huge. I know you're not saying that, but.
Well, let me just say one thing real quickly here, though, is one of the real distinctions of these conflicts now is that it isn't the 18 and 20-year-olds. We're having older soldiers than ever before because of the use of our National Guard and Reserve. This is a complete distinction in American history. One of the things that my novel is about is an older man who goes to war. He's in his 40s. His children are teenagers. This is very different. I'm sorry? Yes, where they're letting people. This is unprecedented. This isn't 18. These are people with families established in their communities. The other thing we're not doing is, as most of you have read about, traumatic brain injury is the signature injury of this war. We have not begun as a nation, not even begun. We're not even at the edge of the precipice of understanding how many generations to come is going to be affected by the number of soldiers with traumatic brain injury coming back from these wars. It's because of concussive injuries like IEDs. We don't even yet know. We haven't even really begun to do the research on it. We know that there's from mild concussion to very severe TBI. This is, Donald Rumsfeld has said, a person who's not very well revered these days, but he has begged and pleaded for people to understand what the long-term implications of traumatic brain injury and the hundreds of thousands of soldiers affected with it and what's going to happen, and family members by that. It's the one injury that affects personhood. It changes who you are. And imagine coming back and being a different person and having your family then have to adjust to a different person. So all longer conversation for another time, but just your question is very well put. What's going to happen? We haven't even begun to deal with this, not even begun as a country, and it's going to go on for many generations hence. I'm sorry you had to wait so long. Go ahead.
That's why I'm enjoying the dialogue. First of all, I really, really, really want to thank you, Peter, Julia, and Marie, all the people that I've met that have been involved in this, the sponsors. To me, it's just incredibly and a huge honor to be a part of this, and to see the conversation starting with this play is so overdue, in my eyes, and the people that we work with every day at A Safe Haven. We work with thousands of people that are homeless every year. Unfortunately, don't know if you know this or not, but 30% of the people that are homeless in Chicago wear a uniform. A Safe Haven is the #1 resource for the VA right now, for housing, for job training, for job placement, for affordable housing. And I can't tell you how many incredibly wonderful success stories we have of people that were homeless for 20 years or longer that have come through our doors and are truly supporting themselves. They're working, they're reuniting with their families, and it's happening. What I loved about the play is, like Michael said, is Peter, you really, really knocked it out of the park in depicting exactly what is happening in terms of, the celebration of the send-off, the celebration of coming home and the anticipation and the expectations. And whether or not the POW was there or not, I feel that everybody brings home these POWs with them anyway, and they feel the compassion for the families of the people that they hurt. They have hearts. Veterans have hearts, and they understand that there's possibly a family that they affected. This is all the stuff that they come home with. When they come home, there's a wonderful celebration. There's barbecues. There's parties, but then everyone's gone, and the family's left to deal with this on their own, and that's where the real collateral damage starts to happen to the families. And we've seen so many families, destroyed by the issues that they come home with. Their own PTSD is only exacerbated by the issues of drug and alcohol addiction and things like that. So what we do at A Safe Haven is we really try to manage, the source of, some of the crime that's committed. A lot of people that fill our prison systems are, veterans, that have drug and alcohol problems, and, domestic violence happens. A lot of things happen, but what we need to do is, and again, the celebration, or not the celebration, but the funeral. So the times that you see all of those people come around are those points: the send-off, the coming home, and the funeral. And I think what's missing, like Peter said, I like to look at what's missing too. What's missing is the transition for that veteran coming home and making sure that the resources and the services are available in a way that's really continuous, integrated, comprehensive, and leads to true, sustainable self-sufficiency and mainstreaming for these veterans. We don't want to put them in communities and keep them there forever. Eventually, they need to be reunited with their families, and there's a way to do that, but it is a transitional process. You can't just bring them home, expect life to go back to the way it was, like the wife expected, but to bring them home in a way that's truly going to transition them to be a huge, benefit for that family.
Well, as you say in the play, you see, or in the opera, you see the crowd scenes, which are so beautifully done, the color and the lights and the beautiful music. But then it's those stark scenes when you have 2, 3 people on the stage where the real, you know.
Everybody go.
And when you were talking, it occurred to me too, there's a lot of attention these days to concussive injuries in professional football. Now, that's a terrible thing, and let's find out more about that. But those are football players. We have tens of thousands of veterans who have served this country and given everything. And where are the stories on that? I mean, I'm real sorry for the tight end that goes across the middle and gets his bell rung with a hard hit. But that's the choice he made to do that, and that's a sport. Let's look at the veterans who are suffering from traumatic brain injury from having served this country. That's a lot better focus for us.
It does take public and private partnerships.
Yes.
I think that most people do care. They just don't know what to do.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Yes. It's not indifference. Yeah.
I invite you to come to our website, come to A Safe Haven, see firsthand like Peter did, talk to some of the veterans at A Safe Haven, talk to Michael and what they're doing on the college campuses. There's some really, really great things that all of us should be doing. And I appreciate it.
That's a great point. Yes, sir.
I don't know why I just got so nervous. I'm usually not nervous. But my name is Jim Proctor. I served in Vietnam. I came home in 1971. I was with the 101st Airborne Division up in Phu Bai, way up near Quan Tri. We did some operations on and around Khe Sanh, some places that you may have heard of. And you were right on point when you're talking about transition. For me, it took 9 years after I got home. The Vietnam War was one thing. Then it was the 9 years after that trying to get myself back together to feel what I call normal. But we didn't have this transition to come back into society coming out of Vietnam. Now, nobody spit on me, and I'm glad they didn't, because I probably would have gone to jail earlier than I did. So what I do see is for the Iraq War veterans and the Afghanistan War veterans, what I've heard is that there is counseling in country, and there's counseling also for them while you're in country and when you're also on your main bases. We didn't have the counseling. I think we need a lot of counseling services that need to be revived for veterans. It helped me a lot. The reentry program for the Iraqi veterans, I don't know what that's like, but I think it might be a little better for you guys than it was for us.
I think it is great as far as the counseling aspect. There's things that could probably be looked at as far as getting people ready for the other challenge societies face, employment, school, exactly. Things like that. But as far as counseling, the military really is going out of their way to identify it every step. My brother just got back from Afghanistan about a week ago. Maybe a little more, February 11th. And he just got into Chicago last night. And the whole reason for that, why it took so long for him to get here, is because they have a 2-week decompression time where they just say, hold off on going, seeing your families, get some good food in your stomach, just re-assimilate into a culture that you don't have to feel threatened everywhere you go and everywhere you look. And then gradually reintegrate with your family. I actually wanted to, and it relates to what you were saying. I looked at the party, the coming home scene, in a completely different light than I guess most people would. And that doesn't mean that I saw it right or wrong. I think it's left up to interpretation. But what I noticed about that scene the most is just as Hercules kind of laid down on the bed, almost in agony, like, then the party broke out, and it's party time, and that's more along the lines of what I faced. When I came home, everybody was so excited and wanted to have those parties, and I wasn't ready for parties yet. Not that I didn't want parties, but I wanted to breathe a second, to kind of look around and realize that, okay, this is back home. It doesn't happen. You don't change yourself mentally, psychologically, to, as Mr. Fuller was saying, do what we have to do, and then come home, and people expect you to turn that off like a light switch. Like, I'm done. You're never done, because you've changed yourself for the rest of your life. And it takes time to learn how, with this new person you've become, with the identity of the military, with the identity of war, and with the identity now of a veteran, what that makes you and what to do with it. Do you fall through the cracks, or do you succeed? Do you take the good things, the discipline, the leadership, the bearing, and take that and drive yourself to be successful? And that's what I'm hoping for, and we're pushing for on college campuses with the Student Veterans of America, trying to get people to take what they've done in the military and turn it into further excellence.
I just want to say a couple more things, and I'm not going to belabor this. I told Peter that I applaud you for what you're doing, and it is doing exactly what I was hoping, stimulate some dialogue and conversation. Because as a veteran, there are a couple of things you're feeling. We feel guilt, we feel anger, some of us feel shame. I was quite frankly, I was proud of what I was, of the man that I was, even though I had those mixed emotions. When I came home, I hung up my uniform, and I don't think I picked it back up until, I also have a son who served 4 years in the Marine Corps. I don't think I put that uniform back on until he came home and put his uniform on. But now he's out, and he's in law school. So, you can definitely turn this thing around, and that's all I wanted to say.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Marcus Wolf, and I wanted to thank Peter for how he combined the historic value of the play with the modern version. And as a student in a social service, a social work agency at SSA, I saw and I liked how you mixed for instance, the small nuances where he left when she started complaining and went and got her pills. And you could see, oh wow, that's a different dynamic. Or how when they were talking and all of a sudden they started drinking out of a whiskey bottle. And he threw the bottle down. Now we'd call the police and there would have been a big mess. And I was wondering why you didn't have police come on scene. I used to be law enforcement. I've had to deal with that. And when you deal with those things, and now as I'm in social work, I could see all the different things, that mental illness that was happening not only with Hercules, but with the wife.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can't speak for veterans, but he had no voice. Everything he said, she didn't listen. And I can imagine every time he said something, he said, oh, look, I'm just, and she didn't listen. So as many times as he spoke, as many times as veterans speak, no one really listens. So you see all these different dynamics that happen that I'm starting to learn about clinically and otherwise. But I'm not going to the clinical side because I want to do the policy side to help make different policies so that you veterans eventually, I'm Coast Guard Auxiliary, I did it on my own. And fortunately, I never had to fight in the war, but I'm starting to understand those nuances that you had to deal with being trained and that kind of thing. But I wanted to thank you for how you combine those two things.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to address my question to Jack. I, like you, was in Vietnam and ordered chunks as a young kid with a flak jacket, and did that after college and after graduate school. And the moral question to me, there were two moral questions I always thought in this war. There were people who thought that they were spit on, and kids who went to college and kids questioned. But the moral question, the other, which has never been talked about, is I had the good fortune of going to Ivy schools. Kids figured out, who went to Ivy schools, how to get out of the war. They got educational exemptions, they got medical. You go off to a doctor and found out that bad knee you had, and as you know, it was rife with that. And it left the disproportionate share of the war to inner city kids. And when you were there and I was there, it wasn't kids from the suburbs of Chicago, it was disproportionately. And then when I came back and walked down the street in the Vietnam parade, it wasn't. I'm the head of the opera here today, so I'm speaking as a guy who, and I guess I just ask you what you think about that moral question, because I think it was, and that was not a voluntary, that was a draft that people figured out how the hell to get out of.
Yeah, well, it's okay, so I'll try to, actually, as you can imagine, thought about that a lot. So I was drafted out of Yale Law School after a semester. And I thought, okay, so my dad got drafted in 1940, and I'm getting drafted. I'm the first guy out. There are 125 other guys who are just going to line up. Most of them are going to go. I came back 2 years later, and there were 4 of us who had gone. So it was very stark for me. On the other hand, and everybody had to deal with the question of what they did. I think, and just as all of us who went had to deal with the question of what we learned about ourselves, so did everybody else. I thought during the Vietnam period, frankly, at the time I went, I was drafted in 1969, and at that point, it was the pressure that people were under, the confusion about what they should do and shouldn't do, added to the fear that everybody has that they're going to get into this thing and they're not going to come home and all that, was just excruciating for people. So I'm actually pretty tolerant of I'm pretty tolerant of what people did. My own. I had a kid that grew up with in the neighborhood. And he went off to college too, and we played jazz music together. He played baritone sax, and I got back, and I got real close to him. He'd actually gone to jail, rather than go, he just said, "I'm not going, and I'm going to jail." I actually respected that tremendously. He did what he did, and he faced the consequences. The only thing I don't like very much is people who try to kid you about it, what they did afterwards, or they lie about it, or they mislead you about it. That I have no tolerance for. I mean, whatever they did, man, it was a miserable situation to face. But, at least square up and say what you did.
Yeah. I was struck. I taught at Princeton a couple of years ago, a semester. And when you walk through these beautiful, it looks like Hogwarts. I mean, it's beautiful, this great, great castle-like place. And on the dormitories, or on the ledges, there are these little stars it's oxidized copper. And you look, and there's beautiful little stars. And I had no idea what that was. And I asked somebody, what's with the stars on the, Jack's nodding, he knows what it is. When I asked about it, it was just so stunning to me. That's where the residence halls were students who had been killed in our wars. If you look closer, their names are etched in small letters there. And of course, it's things like there's the Civil War, there's World War I, there's World War II, there's Korea, very few Vietnam, and none Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was so struck, and I thought, what has happened in our country when it used to be this notion of shared sacrifice, whether you were at Princeton or, Peoria Community College, you went, you did your duty, and that's not around today, that spirit. And just walking through winding through these little stone paths through this beautiful campus, and to see those stars. And there's a gate also that the parents of a young man who died in World War I had contributed. It said, his sun is yet set, though it be yet day. They had inscribed on the gate for their son from World War I. Didn't used to matter then. Whether it said whether you were the Ivies or no college at all, and we just don't have that spirit anymore. I take your point. Yes, we have another. Yep.
That was easy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not so easy.
Hi. I'm Bernard Jones. I just want to first of all say thank you, Mr. Sellars, for a great play. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the movements and the music. Thanks to Safe Haven for giving me a chance to sit down, get clean off of drugs, first and foremost, and to be able to be there for my daughter, who did 15 years in the military. I did 6 years in the Army from 82 to 88, and then I did 6 more years from 1999 to 2005 with the Navy. I wasn't able to go to war as bad as I wanted to go, especially after the Twin Towers, because my daughter was there. She did 3 tours in Iraq, 18-month tours each. And because I'm in safe haven, I've been able to keep myself together for her. She's back home now, and she needs me. She's in Texas, but she calls me all the time because she tells me that I'm the best therapist that she could have, you know, and I understand that. But the thing is, for me, is, you know, when we go off and they change our entire language, our entire way of thinking, we come back, and I took an oath, you know. I said that I'm an American fighting man, and I serve in these forces that protect this country and this way of life. And I'm willing to die for this country. I meant that. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of soldiers here today did also, you know, and they teach you how to just be a total weapon. And as you were saying, ma'am, I don't forget your name, but I'm a field artillery man. So I spent a lot of time in howitzers, M109s, M110s. And those things kick. Okay, when you're standing on the side of those and you pull that doggone coil, let me tell you, it's a concussion unlike anything any football player could ever experience. So I'm just grateful, and I just wanted to, you know, just say something, just to let you know that I'm really grateful to be here, and I thank at Safe Haven, I thank you for the play that you put together.
Thanks. I think this is working. Thank you, each and every one of you. I have a question. First of all, my husband and I were privileged to be able to support this panel. And while most people think it's because we love the opera and we love the University of Chicago, where we both are part of the administration and teach still and so on and so forth and are very involved as well, it's really because of our son, who after 9/11 as a senior in high school decided to enlist. And he served in Afghanistan. He was in the 10th Mountaineering. And one of the hardest days for us was he was on the plane coming home, and they turned them around in air and redeployed them back. And had 4 years in some of the areas now that are probably some of the most scary areas on the planet. The question I really have goes to something that Mr. Sullivan said, and actually all of you have touched on, and it is the paradox of, I would say, success, and then the delay and even the denial of things that stand in the way of success of some of our veterans. The son that went is the most, I mean, he's like Hercules. I mean, he's our son, but he's handsome and strong, and he's like wonderful. And he couldn't be here today, and he's going to go to the opera a week from Wednesday on our regular tickets, because we're going to come back for opening night. And the reason I'm saying this is he, out of, you know, we're obviously very involved in academia and all these other types of things, and, you know, so we have children who tend to be that way. He was the one that wasn't. But he's the one that everybody's drawn to, a true leader. And he went into the Army, and he became a leader automatically, just rose up, and so on and so forth. And then he came back because we have privilege, and we thank God every day for it. We're able to send him to college, okay? And that gave him a structure. But now, coming to the end of that period, and this is my question really, is the delay and the denial. He started from going straight A's, a little, you know, coming down, okay? Also, though, if you talk about it has anything to do with the experience, absolutely not. This was something to have such great pride in, and he has such great pride in. And there's also something that you said, Mr. Fuller, that I identified with as well. The real, and I think maybe you all touched on it, the disconnect between what you go through there. And even looking at the pictures that he sent, and, you know, you have Skype and all these other type of things that we were able to do. This inability to really talk about it. Like he somehow has had this experience that is so different. But he would be the first person to say, whatever it is he's now going through, and then it's true, you know, look at other kids go through stuff, you know, a lot of, you know, you could say, I don't want to call anybody a spoiled brat, and you could say, oh, I don't want to study anymore, but he was doing, I think that there are some things with delay and denial and this paradox of how you do success in these structures. And the Army really, he would say, the Army really made him a man. I mean, he really, you know, he was fine in high school, but it was a wonderful experience for him. But also now I feel that there's something else that's going on in that denial. So that's my question.
I think if there's one thing that, you know, I can never speak for every veteran in this country or in the world, but I think if you were to ask me my opinion of the one thing that all veterans would say they miss out of the military, it's definitely not the combat deployments. It's the camaraderie. That's one thing the military has, is because of the culture shock and because of the training. When you go through that, the only person you have is the person to the left and the person to your right of you. A lot of disconnect is done mentally, unfortunately, to the families, and something that a lot of families can't understand. I found that it was easier to disconnect myself from everything if I didn't have a mother or a father or a girlfriend to think about. Then I wasn't losing anything. I didn't have them to lose if something were to happen to me. So you pretend that nothing else exists except for that day, that moment, that time, and the people around you. So people that come back are going to be void of that. They're going to miss that. And it hits some people a month later, it hits some people 5 years later, and it hits some people 10 years later. You can't dictate when you're going to be affected by something. I'm sure there's gentlemen from the Vietnam and even the Korean War, you know, that still might just turn around tomorrow and something will come back and trigger something that they haven't even faced yet. So to answer your question for your son, the best way that I've found, and in talking to other veterans, they have found, is that peer networking. It's why we're trying to build veterans organizations on campuses, because when you come, and whether it's reentry into civilian life or reentry to the campus life, you're in an element that you don't quite understand and that most definitely doesn't understand you. And it's nice to know that there's somebody else across the room, this kid over there with the high and tight haircut. Are you a veteran? Yeah, me too.
The panelists were going to make a final remark, and then I know people do need to get going, so don't feel self-conscious if you do. We'll keep talking, but just if you do need to leave, as I said, we'll keep the conversation going, but don't feel bad if you have to run off. People do have responsibilities, and so again, John, you want to address?
Just three quick observations about your comment. One is squad cohesion is one of the factors that buffers people from getting PTSD. Not everyone in the squad feels part of that squad, and not all squads have that cohesiveness. But that's one of the biggest predictors of who's likely to suffer, the absence of that feeling within the Army. So the camaraderie is something that characterizes the military, but not everyone enjoys that. And of course, coming home, its absence is really quite deleterious. Second, if you want to know who's likely to commit suicide in the Army, we've had a real rise over this past 10 years. It's who's having problems at home. There's a way to track, whether they're actually contacting the family and whether there's problems, and that's the best single predictor about who then commits suicide. So this is something that's a major problem. The Army now happily recognizes and is trying to do something about, but it's a difficult thing. Third, the undiagnosed problems in the Army, either because of concussive disorders or other trauma-related disorders, about a third, slightly under a third of those who need help are getting that help. There are more people now consulting that they can go to, but only a third or fewer are actually taking advantage of that. I mean, it is the case sometimes that the peers are the best or provide important support, but there are also professionals that have expertise that can really benefit. One of the reasons they're not is the stigma that's associated with it. And so again, I just want to thank the veterans who came to this, the organizations that have been developed to help in the transitioning, the McCormick, and most importantly, Peter for this opera, because it makes the connection to those students at our elite universities to the civilians out there and to the veterans who really need to have a frank conversation about these problems.
I know this gentleman wanted. Do we have a free mic?
I'm good. I'm sure everyone can hear me. To you, John, you did a great job, Mr. Sellars, on some other things. We're talking about like there's a structured family waiting to come back. I was in the Army from 1979 to 2000. And I'm telling you, the majority, I was a combat armed soldier, the majority of the soldiers that I received were from dysfunctional families.
Right.
So there's not a home base for them to come back. The next thing is regardless if we want to talk about it, the white elephant in the room, there's still racism, there's still the gay and lesbian thing. Mr. Sellars, you did a very subtle job of bringing that in, and I appreciate that. But they still have all the societal things to come back to over and above that. We're making the assumption that families are open arms, not to counter you, ma'am, but there's a whole bunch that's not.
You're right.
So I would say that, we're disillusional if we think that the families are waiting with open arms for these. They left for a reason, and you don't go into harm's way for no reason at all. In the family, Mike, that you talked about, the military family, that's stronger than you can ever imagine. And I talked to many of the veterans out here, the 2 Korean veterans that I met, they're still hanging together. You won't see that in today's group of folks. The World War I, the World War II folks, they hung together for long periods of time. But the dysfunctionalism of the groups now, because they break the organizations up, they scatter them to the 4 winds, they don't give the opportunities that they did when, I was in special branches, so we stuck together and we got through it. There were gentlemen over here that talked about they just want opportunities. The opportunities are there sometimes, and people just don't recognize what is available to them. But the dysfunctional family is something that's very significant, and I think from the Marine Corps or Army, whatever, you'll see that as a common bond. And so I think we miss the boat when we think there's a family waiting always for the service members to come back to. And that leads to where Safe Haven and the other organizations fill that gap. And I appreciate the Safe Haven. Thank you.
Great point.
Hello.
Oh, we got one more. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm Joseph Kelly, and I'm from Safe Haven. I'm a vet there. I just want to thank the panel and everyone for giving me this opportunity, every vet in here, to have something constructive to do and keep up the good work. Look like we all headed in the same direction, and unity is the key. God bless you, and thanks for everything.
We have one more question here, and then we'll just hear a last word from the panelists. And thank you.
I'm with the Korean War National Museum, and I would like to thank Mr. Sellars, the McCormick Foundation. They gave us a call to see if I could get a hold of some of our Korean War veterans. And in the discussions from, they were at a group discussion with Mr. Sellars last Monday. They came away when they called me. I asked, how'd things go? What'd you discuss? And I talked to the same 3 tonight. And they all felt that the more things change, the more they stay the same. The younger generation, the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, realized because they were standing around talking after the meetings a week and a half ago, that, gee, it's the same problems. They realized that the older generation had the same problems that they have, and the older generations understand that now a little bit too. The equipment may have changed, but the problems are still the same. And I would like to thank Mr. Sellars for that, for doing that and allowing the veterans from Korea from 60 years ago to have a little bit of their say. Thank you.
Thank you. So I said we'll have one comment from everybody, and I'll start and just say that there's platitudes that you read in your life, but you have to kind of live your way into understanding them. Seeing Peter's production here today, I now understand as never before Friedrich Nietzsche's remark that we have art so that we might not perish from the truth.
My last and final comment. And this didn't really get mentioned. I was hoping somebody would bring it up, but it didn't. One of the things I liked about the most in your opera was the fact that The gentleman that walked in with Hercules, not Hercules, but the soldier, I think the fact that he was standing there almost the entire time with no other intended purpose was so perfectly symbolic, because everything was going on. If Hercules is meeting with his family, he's talking to his son, but that image, that soldier is still there because it never leaves. You never truly turn it off. So excellent in getting that.
Jesus.
I think this is Peter's intention, but I just would hope that this is not where we end, but where we start this discussion, and we try to do something about the problems that have been identified.
It's really been a privilege to be with you all, and it's when it's just very moving to be among you all again. In effect, it's very moving.
Thank you very much.
Thank everyone for participating in this project. It will be ongoing. The performances continue the next few weeks here, but we will work on this project a lot more, and let's have more conversations and share our country. Thank you.